Welcome to Her Journey, where every woman's story matters. If you're ready for a story that will make your blood boil and your heart race, then you've come to the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now because today's story is about a 68-year-old woman named Annabelle Simon who discovered that sometimes the most devastating revenge comes from knowing exactly where to strike. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in this tale of ultimate betrayal and the most satisfying payback you'll ever hear. My name is Annabelle Simon, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd learned every possible way a heart could break. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was tending to my prize-winning roses in the garden of my beautiful beachfront home in Malibu. The same home where I'd raised my adopted son Fred after finding him abandoned at a gas station 25 years ago. The same home where we'd celebrated birthdays, graduations, and every milestone that mattered. Mom, Fred's voice cracked through the phone, and immediately I knew something was terribly wrong. Mom, I need to see you. It's urgent. I set down my gardening shears, my hands already trembling. Of course, sweetheart. What's happening? I can't explain over the phone. Can Avalon and I come over? Please. Avalon. My daughter-in-law of 3 years, a woman who'd never quite warmed to me despite my best efforts. Something about her had always felt calculated. But Fred loved her, and that had been enough for me. You know you're always welcome here, I said. Come over right away. 30 minutes later, I watched through my bay window as Fred's BMW pulled into my circular driveway. The car looked newer than I remembered, which seemed odd given what was about to unfold. Fred emerged first, looking disheveled and broken in a way that made my maternal instincts scream. At 28, he was still my baby, no matter how tall and successful he'd become as a marketing executive. Avalon stepped out next, and despite the supposed crisis, she looked absolutely stunning. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. For a woman facing financial ruin, she certainly didn't look the part. They walked to my front door slowly, Fred's shoulders slumped with what appeared to be shame, while Avalon's green eyes darted around, taking in every detail of my property with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Mom, Fred said as I opened the door, immediately pulling me into a hug that felt desperate and clinging. Thank you for seeing us. Don't be ridiculous, I said, leading them into my living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. You never need to thank me for being here for you. Avalon perched on the edge of my white leather sofa like a cat ready to pounce, her manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse. Annabelle, we really appreciate this, she said, though her smile never quite reached her eyes. I poured coffee into my best china, the set Harold had given me for our wedding anniversary before he passed 5 years ago. As I handed Fred his cup, I noticed his hands were shaking. Tell me what's wrong, I said gently. Fred couldn't meet my eyes. Mom, I've made some terrible mistakes. The business, the investments I told you about, they all went bad. Really bad. My heart sank. Fred had been so excited about his new ventures, the opportunities that were going to set our family up for generations. I'd been proud of his ambition, even if I didn't fully understand all the financial details he'd shared. How bad? I asked quietly. Avalon leaned forward, her voice taking on a trembling quality that somehow felt rehearsed. We're facing foreclosure, Annabelle. If we don't come up with $200,000 by Friday, we lose everything. The house, Fred's business, our children's future. The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000. It was almost exactly what I had in my savings account. Money I'd carefully accumulated over decades of smart investments, supplemented by Harold's life insurance and the appreciation of this beachfront property. The kids don't know yet, Fred said, his voice breaking. Harper and Mason think we're just going on a little vacation while Daddy fixes some work stuff. But Mom, if I can't solve this, they'll lose their home, their school, everything. I thought about my grandchildren. Harper, 7 years old with her gap-toothed smile and love of seashells, and Mason, 5 years old, who called me Grandma Bella and insisted I make him chocolate chip pancakes every Sunday morning. What about family, friends, a bank loan? I asked, though I already knew the answer from the desperation in Fred's eyes. Avalon shook her head sadly. My parents cut me off years ago. And the banks? Well, once you're in this deep, they won't touch you. Fred's credit is destroyed. Mom, Fred said, finally looking at me with tears streaming down his face. I know it's asking too much. I know it's everything you have, but I don't know where else to turn. You're the only person who's ever really been there for me. The reminder of our history together, how I'd found him as a scared 3-year-old and chosen to make him my son, hit exactly where he intended. This was the child I'd nursed through fevers, helped with homework, cheered on at baseball games. The young man I'd put through college and celebrated with at his wedding. What would you need from me? I heard myself asking. Avalon's eyes lit up with something that looked suspiciously like triumph, though she quickly masked it with relief. The $200,000 would cover the immediate debts and save the house. But Annabelle, we were also hoping, well, this beach house is so big for just you. We thought maybe we could stay here temporarily, Fred rushed to explain. Just until we get back on our feet. The kids love this place, and it would give us time to rebuild without the pressure of rent or mortgage payments. I looked around my living room, at the space Harold and I had designed together, where we'd planned to grow old watching the sunset over the ocean. It was too big for me now, that was true. And the thought of having my grandchildren's laughter fill these rooms again was appealing. You want me to give you the money and let you live here? I clarified. We'd pay you back every penny, Fred said quickly. With interest. I swear on my life, Mom. This is just temporary. Avalon nodded enthusiastically. And we take care of the house, handle all the maintenance, make sure you're comfortable. It would be perfect for everyone. Something about the way she said perfect sent a chill down my spine, but I was looking at my son's desperate face, thinking about my grandchildren potentially losing their home. Okay, I said quietly. Fred's head snapped up. Okay, I'll give you the money, and you can move in here while you get back on your feet. The transformation in the room was immediate. Fred began crying again, this time with relief, launching himself from his chair to hug me so tightly I could barely breathe. Mom, I can't believe. Thank you. Thank you so much. Over his shoulder, I watched Avalon's face. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't relief or gratitude. It was pure, calculating satisfaction. But Fred was holding me, sobbing into my shoulder like he had as a little boy, and I told myself I was imagining things. Stress could make anyone look strange. We'll need to move quickly, Avalon said, her voice suddenly businesslike. The foreclosure proceedings are moving fast. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of paperwork and phone calls. I liquidated my entire savings account, watching 40 years of careful financial planning disappear with a few signatures. My banker, Mr. Rodriguez, who'd handled my accounts for 15 years, looked genuinely concerned. Mrs. Simon, are you absolutely certain about this? This represents your entire financial security. It's for my family, I said firmly, though my hands shook as I signed the withdrawal slip. The house transfer was more complicated. My attorney, Janet Walsh, had handled Harold's estate and seemed genuinely alarmed by my decision. Annabelle, I have to ask, are you under any kind of pressure to do this? Because what you're proposing is essentially giving away a property worth over $2 million. The number stopped me cold. I'd bought this house with Harold 30 years ago for $300,000. The beachfront location and my careful maintenance had turned it into something far more valuable than I'd realized. Janet, my son is about to lose everything. His children need stability. But why not a loan agreement? Or shared ownership? What you're proposing leaves you with no legal protection. Fred shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact. Avalon, however, was all smiles and gracious charm. Ms. Walsh, we completely understand your concern for Annabelle. That's exactly why we want this to be a true family arrangement where we can all take care of each other. The sooner we can finalize this, the better, Avalon added when Janet stepped out to make copies. Before the foreclosure becomes irreversible. Something about the urgency bothered me, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was about saving my family. The day we finalized everything, Fred held me close. Mom, you've saved us. I promise we'll make this work. We'll take care of you too. Avalon nodded enthusiastically, though I noticed she was already on her phone, apparently making arrangements. Absolutely, Annabelle. We're family now, all under one roof. It'll be wonderful. That evening, as I watched them drive away to collect their belongings, I stood in the doorway of what was no longer my house, feeling strangely hollow. I'd given them everything, my money, my home, my security. But instead of the warm glow of having helped my family, I felt an inexplicable dread. They moved in 2 days later with what seemed like an army of professional movers and enough belongings to stock a small mansion. I watched from the kitchen window as box after box was carried into my home, followed by furniture I'd never seen before. Where did all this come from? I asked Fred as workers carried in what appeared to be a brand new Italian leather sectional. Oh, we had some things in storage, he said vaguely. From before the trouble started. Avalon swept through the house like a conquering general, immediately rearranging furniture and making changes that made my chest tighten. My grandmother's antique side tables were moved to the garage for safekeeping. Harold's reading chair was relocated to the basement to make room for the children's play area. I hope you don't mind, she said with that smile that never reached her eyes. I just want to make sure the space works for everyone. Harper and Mason seemed excited about their new rooms, but I noticed they were keeping their distance from me in a way they never had before. When I tried to offer Mason his usual chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday morning, he shook his head. Mommy says we can't eat too much sugar anymore, he said quietly. I looked across the kitchen to where Avalon was preparing what appeared to be an elaborate organic breakfast spread. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever your mommy thinks is best. But something cold settled in my stomach as I realized my traditional Sunday morning routine with my grandson had just been eliminated without discussion. Over the following weeks, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. Avalon had strong opinions about everything: the temperature setting, too cold, my cooking schedule, too unpredictable, even my morning routine of watching the sunrise from the deck, too early and disruptive. Annabelle, she said one morning after I'd made the mistake of starting my coffee maker at 6 a.m., I think we need to establish some house rules so everyone can coexist peacefully. The list she presented was extensive: designated quiet hours, shared cooking schedules, restrictions on which areas of the house I could access during the children's nap times. Reading it felt like being relegated to the status of a tenant in my own home. This seems a bit much, I said carefully. It's just temporary organization, Fred assured me, though he wouldn't meet my eyes, until we all adjust to living together. But the adjustment seemed to flow in only one direction. My belongings continued to disappear into storage. My routines were disrupted and rearranged. Even my daily walks on the beach were discouraged because Avalon worried about me, wandering off alone at your age. 3 weeks after they moved in, I overheard a phone conversation that made my blood run cold. I'd come back early from one of my supervised grocery trips to find Avalon on the deck, speaking in hushed tones into her cell phone. "No, it's going perfectly," she was saying. The old woman signed everything over without a single question. Can you believe how easy this was? I froze behind the sliding door, my grocery bags cutting into my hands. Friday? Yes, that works perfectly. She'll never see it coming. Avalon laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. By the time she figures out what happened, we'll be long gone with enough money to disappear forever. My knees nearly gave out. I managed to back away from the door and retreat to my bedroom, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just heard. They weren't struggling financially. This had all been planned. But planned for what? That night, I waited until the house was quiet before conducting my own investigation. Using the computer in Harold's old office, now temporarily converted into Avalon's workspace, I began searching for any trace of my son's supposed financial troubles. What I found made my stomach turn. Fred's social media accounts, which he thought I didn't know how to access, painted a picture of anything but financial hardship. Photos from just 2 months ago showed him and Avalon at expensive restaurants, luxury shopping trips, even a weekend in Vegas that must have cost thousands. But it was Avalon's Instagram account that revealed the true scope of their deception. Her bio read "Living my best life," and her recent posts were a catalog of luxury that couldn't possibly be funded by a man facing foreclosure. Designer handbags worth more than most people's cars. Jewelry that gleamed with the unmistakable sparkle of genuine diamonds. Photos tagged at exclusive spas and five-star hotels, all posted within the past month, well after their supposed financial crisis began. I dug deeper, using skills Harold had taught me during his years as an accountant. Property records showed that Fred and Avalon's house, the one supposedly in foreclosure, had actually been sold 6 months ago. For a profit. The buyer was listed as Cascade Holdings LLC, which took some research to unravel. When I finally traced the corporate structure, I discovered that Cascade Holdings was owned by a company called Summit Investments, which was in turn owned by Peak Financial Group. And Peak Financial Group's primary shareholder was Avalon Martinez. My daughter-in-law owned the company that had bought their house. They'd sold their property to themselves, created fake foreclosure documents, and used the manufactured crisis to manipulate me into giving them everything I owned.
But why?
If they'd already profited from selling their house, why did they need my money and property? The answer came when I found airline confirmations in Avalon's email. She'd carelessly left herself logged in on Harold's computer. 4 one-way tickets to Switzerland, departing Saturday morning. First class, of course. They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to disappear entirely, taking my grandchildren to a country that would make recovery nearly impossible. I printed everything I could find, my hands shaking with a combination of fury and heartbreak. My son, the child I'd rescued, raised, and loved unconditionally, was planning to rob me blind and vanish from my life forever. But as I sat in Harold's chair, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, burning like acid in my chest, but underneath it, something else was growing. Something cold and calculating and absolutely furious. They thought they were dealing with a naive old woman who could be easily manipulated and discarded. They had no idea who they were really up against. I'd spent 40 years married to an accountant who taught me every trick in the book about money, investments, and legal loopholes. I'd survived Harold's death, built a successful small business selling my artwork, and accumulated wealth through shrewd investments and careful planning. If Avalon Martinez wanted to play games with someone's life, she'd picked the wrong target. I began planning my own strategy, and by dawn, I knew exactly how I was going to destroy them. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed. I made breakfast, chatted pleasantly with the children, and even complimented Avalon on her new necklace, a piece I now knew cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Thank you, Annabelle," she said with that practiced smile. "Fred surprised me with it yesterday. Isn't he sweet?" "Incredibly thoughtful," I agreed. Knowing full well that the necklace had been purchased with money stolen from me, I waited until Fred left for work, wherever he actually went during the days, and Avalon took the children to their private school, paid for with my money, no doubt, before making my first call. "Janet? It's Annabelle Simon. I need to see you immediately. It's urgent." My attorney agreed to an emergency meeting, and I arrived at her office with a folder full of evidence that painted a clear picture of fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. "Jesus Christ, Annabelle," Janet said after reviewing everything. "This is criminal. We need to call the police immediately." "Not yet," I said calmly. "I want to handle this my way first." "What are you planning?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. "I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve." My second stop was the bank, where Mr. Rodriguez helped me understand the full scope of the financial manipulation. The $200,000 I'd given Fred had never gone toward any debt payments. Instead, it had been immediately transferred to an offshore account controlled by Peak Financial Group. "Mrs. Simon, this is clearly fraud. You should contact the authorities." "I will," I assured him. "But first, I need you to help me with something." My third stop was more unconventional. Vincent Torres ran a private investigation agency that specialized in financial crimes, and his reputation for thoroughness was legendary. More importantly, he had connections that could track money movements across international borders. "Mrs. Simon," he said after reviewing my evidence, "what these people have done to you is beyond criminal. It's sadistic. But you know that once they leave the country, recovery becomes exponentially more difficult." "They're not leaving the country," I said quietly.
"None."
"They think they're leaving Saturday morning, but they're not going anywhere." I spent the rest of the week implementing a plan that was beautiful in its simplicity. Using Harold's old business connections and my own network of contacts, I began laying traps that would ensure Avalon and Fred's world would collapse the moment they tried to execute their escape plan. The first trap was financial. Working with Vincent and a forensic accountant he recommended, we traced every dollar of my stolen money and identified all of Peak Financial Group's assets. What we discovered was that Avalon's criminal enterprise extended far beyond just stealing from me. She'd been running a long-term con game, targeting wealthy older individuals across multiple states. My money was just the latest addition to a portfolio of stolen assets worth over $3 million. But her greed had made her sloppy. By using the same corporate structure for multiple cons, she'd created a paper trail that would lead federal investigators directly to her door. The second trap was legal. Janet had quietly contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, providing them with enough evidence to open an investigation. But instead of moving immediately, they agreed to coordinate with my timeline. The third trap was personal, and it was the one that would hurt Avalon the most. You see, while researching Peak Financial Group, Vincent had discovered something interesting about Avalon's background. Her real name wasn't Avalon Martinez. It was Alice Morgan, and she had an extensive criminal history that included identity theft, marriage fraud, and elder abuse. She'd been using false identities for years, moving from state to state, targeting vulnerable people, and disappearing before anyone could catch up with her. Fred wasn't her first victim. He was just the most recent in a long line of people she'd manipulated and destroyed. But Alice Morgan had made one crucial mistake. In her arrogance, she'd used her real Social Security number when setting up Peak Financial Group, probably assuming no one would ever dig deep enough to make the connection. That one mistake was going to cost her everything. Friday evening, I put on the performance of my lifetime. I waited until after dinner, when Fred and Avalon were relaxing on the deck with glasses of wine, a $200 bottle they'd purchased with my money, before approaching them with tears in my eyes and my hands shaking. Fred, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important. He looked up with concern that seemed genuine, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What's wrong, Mom? I've been thinking about this living arrangement, and I realize I may have made a mistake. Avalon's attention sharpened like a predator sensing prey. What kind of mistake, Annabelle? This house is just too full of memories for me. Harold and I built our entire life here, and having it so changed, so different, it's harder than I expected. Fred reached for my hand. Mom, if you're not comfortable, we can adjust things. We can put your furniture back. No, sweetheart. I think I need to make a clean break. Start fresh somewhere smaller, simpler. I could see Avalon trying to control her excitement, though she managed to arrange her features into an expression of concern. What are you thinking? She asked carefully. I want to sell the house. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Fred looked genuinely shocked, but Avalon's eyes lit up with something that looked dangerously close to triumph. Sell it, Fred repeated. But Mom, where would you go? Where would we go? Well, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. If we sold this place, it would be worth enough to buy you a lovely home of your own, free and clear, plus leave me with enough to buy a small condo somewhere quiet. Avalon was practically vibrating with excitement now, though she was trying to hide it. Annabelle, that's very generous, but are you sure? This is such a big decision. I'm sure. In fact, I've already had a realtor come look at it. She thinks we could get $2.8 million, maybe more if we stage it right. Fred was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Mom, that's an incredible amount of money. And you deserve it, sweetheart. After everything you've been through, after all the stress and worry, I want you and the children to have security. Avalon could barely contain herself. When would this happen? Well, that's the thing. The realtor says she already has interested buyers. If we moved quickly, we could close by next Friday. Next Friday? Fred looked overwhelmed. That's so fast. Sometimes fast is better, Avalon said quickly. Less time to second-guess ourselves. There's just one thing, I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me. We'd need to find somewhere to stay during the transition. Maybe a nice hotel for a week or two while the paperwork gets finalized. Of course, Avalon said immediately. We could book a suite somewhere beautiful. Make it like a family vacation. I smiled at her, letting warmth and gratitude fill my expression. You're so thoughtful, dear. I'm so glad Fred found someone who cares about family the way you do. That night, I heard them through the thin walls, their voices excited and animated as they revised their escape plan. Instead of fleeing to Switzerland with just my $200,000 and whatever else they'd stolen, they were now anticipating a payday of well over $2 million. Their greed had made them exactly where I wanted them, completely committed to staying until they could claim their biggest prize. They had no idea that their Saturday morning flight to Switzerland was about to become the least of their worries. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of crystal-clear California sky that made postcards look dull by comparison. I was up early, as always, watching the sunrise over the Pacific and sipping my coffee from Harold's favorite mug. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. Mrs. Simon? This is Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We're ready to proceed. Perfect timing, I said quietly. They should be making their move within the hour. I discovered the night before that Fred and Avalon had planned an elaborate deception for their departure. They were going to tell me they were taking the children to breakfast and a movie, giving them several hours to get to the airport and board their plane before I realized they weren't coming back. What they didn't know was that Vincent Torres had been monitoring their communications for the past week. Every call, every text, every email had been intercepted and analyzed. The FBI knew their exact itinerary, their flight information, even which gate they'd be departing from. At 8:30 a.m., I heard movement upstairs. Avalon's voice carried down the hallway as she roused the children with artificial cheer. "Come on, babies. Mommy and Daddy are taking you on a special adventure today." I positioned myself in the kitchen, making a show of preparing breakfast as they came downstairs. Fred looked nervous, avoiding eye contact, while Avalon was practically glowing with excitement. "We thought we'd take the kids out for the day," Fred said awkwardly. "Maybe drive up the coast, make a whole thing of it." "How wonderful," I said warmly. "Do you have everything you need?" I watched as Avalon did a mental inventory of their hastily packed bags, now loaded in the car. "I think so. We might be out pretty late, though. Don't wait up for us." "Of course not. You young people need your family time." Harper and Mason hugged me goodbye, their little arms tight around my waist. "Love you, Grandma Bella," Mason whispered, and my heart broke a little more knowing this might be the last time I'd see them for a very long time. "I love you too, sweetheart. Both of you. Remember that, okay?" As their car pulled out of the driveway, I called Agent Walsh. Their mobile, black BMW, license plate. I rattled off the information Vincent had provided. "We've got eyes on them, Mrs. Simon. They won't make it to the airport." But I wasn't content to just wait for news. I had one more performance to give. The call came at 2:47 p.m. "Mrs. Simon? This is Detective Rodriguez with LAX Security. I'm calling about your son and daughter-in-law." I let the appropriate amount of confusion and concern color my voice. "Is everything all right? They took the children out for the day." "Ma'am, they've been detained at the airport on federal charges related to financial fraud and elder abuse. The children are safe and are currently with Child Protective Services until family arrangements can be made." "I don't understand. Financial fraud? There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid not, ma'am. We're going to need you to come down to the station to provide a statement." I arrived at the federal building an hour later, dressed in my most conservative outfit and carrying a purse full of tissues that I'd been practicing using effectively. Agent Walsh met me in the lobby, a professional woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Simon, I know this must be incredibly difficult for you. I just can't believe Fred would do something illegal," I said, letting my voice tremble. "Are you sure there hasn't been some mistake?" "I'm afraid the evidence is quite clear. Your son and his wife have been running a sophisticated financial fraud operation targeting elderly individuals. You're not their first victim." Agent Walsh led me to a conference room where the full scope of their crimes was laid out in meticulous detail. Bank records, false documents, communication intercepts, and evidence of multiple victims across several states. "Mrs. Simon, we understand that you gave them $200,000 and signed over your house to them. Is that correct?" "Yes," I whispered, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. "Fred said they were facing foreclosure. I couldn't let my grandchildren lose their home." "I'm very sorry to tell you this, but there was no foreclosure. The entire story was fabricated to manipulate you into giving them access to your assets." I let out a sob that was only partially manufactured. Regardless of my plans for revenge, the pain of my son's betrayal was entirely real. "What happens now?" I asked. "Your son and his wife are facing federal charges that could result in significant prison time. However, because you're a victim who cooperated with our investigation, we'll be working to help you recover your stolen assets." "And the children?" "That's more complicated. Given that both parents will likely be incarcerated, custody will need to be determined by the family court system." I looked up at Agent Walsh with what I hoped appeared to be dawning realization. "Agent Walsh, if Fred goes to prison and Avalon goes to prison, would the children need somewhere to live? Are you saying you'd be interested in seeking custody?" "They're my grandchildren," I said simply. "They're innocent in all this. Of course I'd want to take care of them." What Agent Walsh didn't know was that I'd already consulted with the best family law attorney in Los Angeles. Given Fred and Avalon's criminal charges, my clean record, and my financial ability to provide for the children, gaining custody would be almost automatic. Harper and Mason would be safe, loved, and far away from their parents' toxic influence. And they'd grow up knowing exactly what kind of people their parents really were. 6 months later, I stood in the family courtroom as the judge made it official. Mrs. Simon, given the defendant's conviction on federal fraud charges and their sentencing to 15 years in federal prison, this court awards you full legal custody of Harper and Mason Martinez Simon. I looked over at Fred and Avalon, both dressed in orange jumpsuits and shackled at the wrists. Fred had been crying throughout the proceeding, finally understanding the full scope of what he'd lost. Avalon looked like she wanted to kill me with her bare hands. "Your Honor," Avalon's attorney said, "my client would like to address the court." "Very well." Avalon stood slowly, her green eyes fixed on me with pure hatred. "That woman is not a fit guardian for my children. She's vindictive and manipulative, and she orchestrated this entire thing." Judge Harrison looked at her with obvious disdain. "Ms. Morgan, and yes, we know that's your real name, you're hardly in a position to lecture anyone about manipulation. You defrauded an elderly woman out of her life savings and attempted to kidnap her grandchildren. Mrs. Simon's actions in exposing your crimes were those of a concerned citizen protecting herself and her family." "She knew," Avalon screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. "She knew about everything, and she set us up." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "You will control yourself in my courtroom, or you will be removed. Mrs. Simon owes you nothing, least of all the courtesy of allowing herself to be victimized by your criminal enterprise." As the bailiffs prepared to escort them back to prison, Fred turned to look at me one last time. His face was a map of regret and loss, and for a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." I looked at my adopted son, the child I'd saved from abandonment, and felt the last of my maternal love for him finally die. "I'm sorry too, Fred. I'm sorry you became someone I don't recognize." 1 year later, I sit on the deck of my beautiful beachfront home, watching Harper and Mason build sandcastles on the beach below. The house is theirs now, too. I've updated my will to ensure they'll inherit everything when I'm gone. The children have adapted remarkably well to their new life. Therapy has helped them understand that their parents made bad choices, but that doesn't reflect on them or their worth. They call me Grandma Bella, like always, but now they also know I'm the person who'll always keep them safe. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. The FBI managed to trace and freeze over $3 million in stolen assets from Avalon's various schemes. As the primary victim who'd provided the evidence that broke the case open, I recovered not just my original $200,000, but additional damages that left me significantly wealthier than I'd been before. I donated a portion of that money to organizations that help elderly victims of financial fraud, but kept enough to ensure Harper and Mason will never want for anything. Fred writes letters from prison sometimes. I don't read them. They go directly into the fireplace, unread and unmourned. He made his choice when he decided to betray the woman who'd given him everything. Avalon also writes, though her letters are quite different. They're filled with rage and threats and promises of revenge when she gets out. Those letters go directly to the FBI, adding additional charges to her sentence. She still doesn't understand that she created her own destruction. In her narcissistic worldview, she was the victim of my manipulation rather than the architect of her own downfall. The irony is delicious. This evening, as I tuck Harper and Mason into their beds, Harper looks up at me with those serious 7-year-old eyes. Grandma Bella, are Mommy and Daddy ever coming home?
No, sweetheart.
They made some very bad choices, and now they have to stay where they are for a very long time. Are you sad about that? I consider the question carefully. Am I sad that I consider the question carefully? Am I sad that my adopted son chose to betray me so completely? Yes. Am I sad that two people I once considered family turned out to be monsters? Absolutely. But am I sad that they're locked away where they can never hurt anyone again?
Not even a little bit.
I'm sad that they chose to hurt people. I tell Harper honestly. But I'm not sad that you and Mason are safe with me now. Will you always keep us safe? Always, I promise, and I mean it with every fiber of my being. Later, after the children are asleep, I pour myself a glass of wine and walk out onto the deck. The Pacific stretches endlessly before me, dark and vast under the star-filled sky. Harold's spirit feels close on nights like this, and I imagine he's proud of how I handled everything. My phone buzzes with a text from Vincent Torres. Thought you'd want to know. Avalon was denied parole again today. Earliest possible release is now 2039. I smile and delete the message. 2039. Harper will be 22 and Mason will be 20. Old enough to understand everything their mother did, old enough to make their own choices about whether she deserves any place in their lives. Something tells me they'll choose wisely. I think about Avalon in her cell tonight, probably writing another furious letter about how I destroyed her life. She still doesn't grasp the fundamental truth that brought about her downfall. You don't survive as long as I have, through losing a husband, raising a child alone, and building a successful life, without learning how to recognize predators. She saw a lonely old woman with money and thought she'd found an easy mark. What she actually found was someone who'd spent decades learning that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who underestimate you. Fred should have known better. He grew up in this house, watching Harold teach me about investments, legal structures, and financial strategy. He saw me turn a small inheritance into a multi-million-dollar portfolio through careful planning and shrewd decisions. But like his wife, he made the fatal mistake of confusing kindness with weakness, generosity with stupidity. They both learned too late that Margaret Simon didn't raise any fools, including herself. As I finish my wine and prepare to go inside, I take one last look at the house that's truly mine again. Tomorrow, Harper has a soccer game, and Mason wants to visit the tide pools. We'll have pancakes for breakfast, chocolate chip, because that's what grandmothers are for. Normal, happy, peaceful days filled with children's laughter instead of adult deception. Fred and Avalon took a year of my life, caused me tremendous pain, and almost succeeded in stealing my future. But in the end, they gave me something precious, absolute certainty about who deserves my love and protection. It's not the people who share my blood or carry my name. It's the people who choose, every single day, to be worthy of the trust one place in them. Harper and Mason have earned that trust simply by being the innocent children they are. Fred and Avalon forfeited at the moment they decided I was expendable. Justice isn't always served in courtrooms. Sometimes it's served by grandmothers who refuse to go quietly into anyone's good night. As I lock the door behind me and turn off the lights, I whisper a promise to the house, to Harold's memory, and to the sleeping children upstairs. No one will ever threaten this family again. And I mean it. Thank you for joining me on Annabelle's journey of justice and triumph. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of women who refuse to be victims. Remember, every woman has a story worth telling, and every story deserves to be heard. Until next time, this is her journey.